Okay, so you want to buy a supercar. Save for years, walk into the dealership, drive out in something that turns heads on every street in town. But here's the strange part. The dealership doesn't actually want to sell it to you. Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Bugatti reject qualified buyers with cash in hand every single week, because the car was never the product they were selling. By the end of this video, you'll know what a supercar actually costs once the paperwork is signed, why the manufacturer is quietly running a psychological experiment on you before you even sit in the seat, and why some of the richest men on earth are legally banned from ever buying one again. Let's start with the sticker. A Porsche 911 Turbo S will run you around $200,000, and honestly, that's just the entry fee to this conversation. A Ferrari 296 GTB sits closer to $320,000. Push into Lamborghini's Revuelto and you're past $600,000. Now go further. The Bugatti Tourbillon, the single most expensive car you can currently order new from any manufacturer on Earth, lists at $4.6 million. And if you want something truly unrepeatable, Rolls-Royce will hand-build you a one-off droptail for roughly $32 million, with only 4 ever produced worldwide, each one built for a single named buyer who dictated everything down to the wood grain on the dashboard. For that tourbillon money, you could buy 18 average American homes outright, with cash left over. Meanwhile, that same $4.6 million, dropped into an index fund and left alone for 20 years, would likely be worth somewhere north of $20 million, doing nothing but sitting there. So before you've even turned the key, the car has already cost you a house, or several, and a small fortune in what that money could have quietly become somewhere else. And here's the part almost nobody explains before they buy. This number is only the first invoice. There's a second one, and it never stops arriving. Here's what nobody mentions in the brochure. Insurance on a car like this runs $5,000 to $20,000 a year, because a standard insurer won't even touch a vehicle worth this much, and you'll need what's called an agreed value policy, meaning the payout is fixed in writing before anything ever goes wrong, not decided afterward by an adjuster who's never seen a car like yours. Maintenance is worse. A Ferrari engine rebuild can exceed $40,000, and a replacement carbon fiber hood on a McLaren runs $15,000, because these parts come from a single supplier with a 6-month waiting list. Then there's the invisible staff nobody ever budgets for. A detailer on retainer. A specialist mechanic who charges triple the going rate, because only a few dozen authorized shops in the entire country are certified to even touch the car. A transport company on call to move it anywhere it needs servicing, because you can't exactly drive a car worth $500,000 through traffic in the rain. Add climate-controlled storage on top, and you're paying rent on a garage before you've finished paying rent on your own house. Then there's depreciation itself, which behaves less like a cost and more like a slow leak you can't see happening in real time, quietly erasing tens of thousands of dollars from the car's value every single year whether you drive it or not. Stack all of it together, and a single supercar can quietly burn through $30,000 a year just existing behind a closed door. What does a car that never even leaves the garage actually cost you? More, most years, than what many people earn at their entire job. Now we get to the question that actually matters. Where does the money come from, and where does it actually go? Most supercars are pure depreciation machines, plain and simple. A new one typically loses somewhere between 20 and 30% of its value in the first year alone. Myth: a supercar is a status symbol and nothing more. Reality: the smartest buyers in this market treat it as a financial instrument wearing a body kit. The smart money doesn't chase the car everyone can order online in an afternoon. It chases the car almost nobody is allowed to order at all. Ferrari's limited runs, cars like the LaFerrari, the Daytona SP3, or the F80, are hand-selected out to existing collectors, and because supply is deliberately kept below demand, some of them rise in value the very day they leave the factory floor. This is where a collector car quietly turns into collateral. A specialist lender will advance real cash against an appreciating classic, because a loan isn't a taxable event the way a sale is, so the car sits untouched in a vault, earning its owner liquidity without ever changing hands. Think of it like a house you never sell but keep borrowing against as it climbs in value. Same asset, same ownership, but now the bank pays you to keep holding it. That's asset-backed lending, and it's the same mechanism family offices use on fine art. Here's the flywheel almost nobody outside this world ever sees. You buy an entry-level Ferrari and behave, on paper, like a proper long-term collector. Ferrari notices and invites you to buy into the next limited series. That car appreciates the moment you take delivery. You borrow against it instead of ever selling it. That cash buys a stake in something producing real income, a business, a property, a fund. And that income is what funds your invitation to the next allocation after this one. Round and round it goes. The object is rarely the investment. The mechanism almost always is. This is also why family offices have quietly become such heavy buyers of blue-chip collector cars over the last few years, alongside fine art and rare watches. It's not because the family office loves cars. It's because a car worth 8 figures is a wrapper around a loan they can draw on whenever cash flow gets tight elsewhere. Because here's what nobody tells you about buying a supercar. You are not actually buying a car. You're buying a stack, layer by layer. Layer 1 is speed, which you'll genuinely use on a public road maybe twice a year. Layer 2 is scarcity, a number stamped on a small plaque telling the world exactly how few of these exist. Layer 3 is the invitation itself, quiet proof that a manufacturer personally decided you were worthy of the car before you ever paid for it. Layer 4 is identity, the version of yourself the car is supposed to announce before you've said a single word. Layer 5, the one almost nobody admits out loud, is access. Owning the right car gets you into the right paddock, the right dinner table, the right room entirely. And underneath every single layer sits the one thing most buyers actually came here for, and it was never the horsepower. It was the invitation, all along. Every part of a modern supercar exists purely to protect that invitation. The design itself is intentionally impractical, low, loud, and genuinely difficult to live with day to day, because a car anyone could drive comfortably to the supermarket wouldn't feel remotely this exclusive. The psychology behind it is engineered just as deliberately. Manufacturers deliberately underproduce against known demand, because scarcity created on purpose reads as prestige, and a multi-year waiting list is free marketing that money literally cannot buy any other way. Behind all of that sits a quieter surveillance layer still. Ferrari tracks who you eventually sell to, how quickly you sell it, what you post online about the car, and even which competitor's badge happens to be parked in your own garage. Every single choice, from the shape of a door hinge to the exact delivery date you're offered, exists to maximize one of 4 numbers, and only 4: scarcity, waiting list length, resale price, and brand mystique. In 2020, Ralph Lauren's yellow Ferrari F50, a car most people outside collector circles had never even heard of, sold at auction for over $9 million, up 67% from what a nearly identical example had fetched only 5 years earlier. Lauren never chased the car for profit. He bought it, kept it, maintained it obsessively for decades, and simply let scarcity do the compounding for him in silence. Contrast that with Nicolas Cage. At the height of his earnings in the mid-2000s, Cage assembled one of the most extravagant car collections in Hollywood history. Dozens of vehicles alongside a private island and multiple mansions across 3 continents. Then, in 2009, the debts finally caught up with him all at once. The IRS came calling for more than $14 million in unpaid taxes. Cars were seized and repossessed one after another. The collection he'd spent a fortune assembling had to be liquidated piece by piece just to keep the rest of his life from collapsing entirely. "I bought things I didn't need," Cage later admitted, to fill a void that the things could never actually fill. One man let a single car sit quietly and compound for 20 years. The other let an entire garage of them become the exact reason his empire nearly cracked in half. But this world does have one real, structural problem, and it isn't the price tag at all. It's reputation risk, because the manufacturer, not the open market, ultimately decides whether you're even allowed to keep playing this game. Floyd Mayweather bought Ferraris and Bugattis and sold them within months to chase whatever came next. Both brands quietly blacklisted him from every future limited allocation. Justin Bieber modified his 458 Italia without permission, then auctioned it off for charity without asking Ferrari first. Ferrari banned him permanently, regardless of the good intentions behind the auction. Wait, that's actually legal? It is. There is no law anywhere requiring a manufacturer to sell you their own product, And Ferrari enforces this constantly, rejecting confirmed, full-funded buyers because their behavior threatened the brand far more than their money ever helped it. This weakness is still very much alive today. One ill-timed social media post can end a relationship worth millions in future allocations, permanently, with no appeal process whatsoever. And here's who should never buy into this world in the first place. Anyone who needs to sell within the first year to cover the payment. Because that single act is the fastest way to get permanently locked out of everything that made the car worth owning. Which is exactly why plenty of billionaires who could easily afford a Bugatti outright simply don't buy one at all. They lease exotic fleets for the weekend instead, or charter through a private collector access club. Because renting the experience gets them the identical status without the depreciation, the insurance premiums, or the risk of getting blacklisted over one bad night out. Let's do the actual math, twice. Scenario 1, the optimistic version. You buy a limited edition Ferrari for $400,000. Annual running costs, insurance, storage, and servicing combined, land near $30,000. The car appreciates 6% in year 1 purely on scarcity. On paper, you're up roughly $10,000 for the year, and you also got to drive a Ferrari. That's the fantasy everyone is sold. Scenario 2, the realistic version. You buy the identical car with financing at 9% interest, because collector car loans are never cheap. Financing costs alone run $36,000 a year. Add the $30,000 in running costs on top. A single insurance claim after one minor accident adds another $20,000 in specialist parts and labor, with a 6-month wait for the part to even arrive. You are now underwater $86,000 in a single year, on a car that was supposed to be quietly appreciating the entire time. And yes, that was still supposed to be the good year. Now imagine the market cools and the appreciation you were counting on simply doesn't show up that year. The gap between the good year and the bad year on the exact same car isn't a few $1,000s. It's closer to $100,000, swinging on nothing but timing, one accident, and one interest rate decision you had no control over. Put that same $400,000 into the S&P 500 instead, and history says you'd have made roughly $32,000 for doing absolutely nothing at all. When owners finally do cash out, it rarely happens at a dealership counter. It happens at a private sale between two collectors, or at a marquee auction house like R.M. Sotheby's, where provenance and rarity, not horsepower, set the final number on the gavel. So what is the wealthy buyer actually purchasing underneath all of it? Pull back every single layer of the stack, and it was never the car at all. It was the invitation. Proof that someone, somewhere, decided you personally belonged in a room most people will never even see the door to. Here's the paradox in one line. The object gets easier to obtain every year, and more expensive to keep every single one of those same years. If you do this right, the car compounds quietly while you barely drive it at all. If you get it wrong, the garage quietly becomes the single most expensive room in your entire house. Jay Leno, who owns roughly 180 vehicles and has reportedly never sold a single one for profit, sits at the ceiling of doing this correctly. The car was never the point. It never was. The invitation always was.